Well, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is Switch Up Sports, and today I'm going to be going through all of the teams in the NFC and their draft needs before we get into draft season, because we all know that this is the best time of the year for most NFL fans, because this is the time where their teams give them the most hope before we get into the draft, because everyone thinks that they're just 1 or 2 draft picks away from potentially hosting a Super Bowl win trophy, parade, all that fancy stuff. Too many NFL fans think that they're just one move away, but we're going to go through all the NFC teams and let's dive right in, starting with the NFC North, the team that is right above my head, where that is my prediction for next year. I think the Bears are going to go 9-8 next year. So if, any of you guys out there, we figure out what, when Vegas comes out with their over-unders, after the full schedule release, we'll see. But that's my early prediction on the Bears. And that is actually who I'm starting with. And they need help on the offensive line fairly bad. Their offensive line is actually dead last in terms of run offense, and they were dead last in total yards last year. So when you think about the Bears, they gave up 68 sacks. Not very good. Some of that is on Caleb, but at the end of the day, the Bears need O-line help. At the end of the day, they've done defense really, really well. If they can get, a second-rate defensive guy later in a pick, they've got, a fairly good defensive culture that just kind of resides in the city, that resides in the building, that resides with, their scouts and some of their internal front office people. So the defensive side, I'm not as worried about, but for them, if they don't get the offensive line figured out, then their offense is realistically never going to get off the ground, because if you can't run the ball, then you can't throw the ball effectively, and that was their issue last year. Moving on to Detroit. This is something where they just need some defensive depth, but realistically, they just, got kind of hit with an injury bug last year. I mean, that is the nature of the game, and the nature of defense is, you do initiate contact primarily, but, you are on the receiving end of people running at their top speed. And so, they got hit with an injury bug. So their needs are going to be more on the defensive side of the football. They need some defensive depth, and especially with some of their offensive weapons and kind of showouts that they had last year. They don't need to mess with the offensive side of the ball. Defense is their thing, but they had a brain drain situation. So we'll see how that affects them going in. And moving on to Minnesota. Minnesota is an interesting one because they're a well-crafted team. They've got multiple choices at quarterback now at this point, whether they decide to keep Sam Darnold, if they actually give the football to Danny Dimes, or if they let him be the backup and then just go ahead and move on to J.J. McCarthy, depending on his knee injury and recovery and how he's looking and what they want to hand him the keys to. You got Jettas on the outside, so no matter who's throwing the ball, he's going to get open. So you look at it to where they've got some comparable weapons. They're okay inside of the trenches. But on the defensive side, I'd say, hey, maybe they can get a piece two or there. But realistically, you can always take help inside of the trenches. They're decent there. Their O-line can maybe snag a guy. Hey, it's always good to have an extra guard. It's good to have an extra tackle. Or, hey, a backup center. We swapped out a guy. Minnesota's in a very good spot. They're a team that they don't have to exactly pour all their pieces in right now. And they've got a good amount of just veteran talent. Minnesota's always been a team where they never really lose, anything that's too crazy. I mean, they're a team that's full of guys who are realistically like 70s and 80s. Like, they're not a team that's like super high up, and, we'll get into them later being the 49ers. Like, the 49ers go through these like big high peaks and valleys, and you're kind of seeing it right now where it's like they've got a bunch of guys who have A names, but now they're at like the low, like D level talent to a degree as they age out. And Minnesota's never been that way. Minnesota's like, nah, we'll take a C plus and a B minus any day, and we'll call it good. And that's kind of where they're at. And so for them, it is just add a piece here, add a piece there. Hey, maybe tweak this, and they're good to go. But at the end of the day, it's going to depend on who's throwing the football, who's handing it off. Is it Sam Darnold? Is it going to be Danny Dimes, which is crazy? Or is it going to be JJ? So that's the bigger piece. The slight little tweaks, not so much of an issue for them. And then moving on to Green Bay, kind of the same piece. They're one of those teams where, all three of those teams, we're talking about a situation where all three of those teams were in the playoffs last year. So when you start getting down to the nitty gritty of like, well, what do they need? It's like, well, if they can produce at the same level that they did last year, maybe slightly better, which is Green Bay's the same, where it's like maybe a defensive lineman or maybe a linebacker or maybe we'll take an extra safety. Like for them, I trust LaFleur on the offensive side of the football. Like Jordan Love is there. Like, okay, he was hurt for a couple games and maybe that impacted. Maybe that's the reason he wasn't as hot or maybe, had a couple highs and lows, but he had a semi-productive year. Again, made it to the playoffs. So for them, it's, again, a small piece and it's an internal thing. So, hey, will we have an extra inside guard? Or are we going to have an extra D lineman? Are we going to pull for a safety? Like, they're in a really good spot. And that's kind of the situation. And again, there's a reason that those three teams made it to the playoffs. So the Bears going 9-8 next year, it's an uphill battle. Now, moving on, we're going to move it out to the NFC East, and we're going to start off with the Cowboys. The Cowboys are an interesting one because the Cowboys both have a very good roster and a very bad roster at the same time. So realistically, they need O-line help fairly bad. The Cowboys and Bears are built a lot of the same, but the difference is the Cowboys have, I would say, almost the same level of talent as the Bears, but the Cowboys have slightly bigger names, but the talent is the same. They're semi-awash. Their rosters realistically are a lot of the same, but the difference is like the Bears have a ton of cap space. The Bears are, in a position where they can move a lot of pieces and they've got a lot of openings and they're on that upward trajectory. Now, do we trust their front office? Same situation here for the Cowboys, but they've handcuffed themselves because, their cap situation is, it's okay. But you're looking at, again, we're deciding on Jerry Jones. Okay, well, their offensive line isn't very good. They just had another O-lineman retire. Now, what are we looking at? They had one of the youngest offensive lines in the league. They had one of the lowest rush attempts, as well as they were right there with the Bears with only 4 yards per rush, one of the lowest in the league. They need help on the O-line. They can't run the football. And when you can't run the football, you can't pass the football. And when it's fairly obvious, hey, we want to get the ball to CD, like it's a pretty obvious system out there. So we'll see. I don't know. We'll see, but I don't trust them. They need a lot of help on the offensive line. They also need help at safety, I think, is a fairly big piece for them. And then if you move on to their counterparts, the Super Bowl champions, they're Super Bowl champions wherever. I don't know. Pick a place. Do they really need help? No. Are they probably going to make 2 moves in the offseason and people are going to go, How did they get some? I really would not be shocked. Like the Myles Garrett stuff, I would not be shocked if somehow he ends up in Philly. I would not be shocked. It's going to happen. They will make 2 moves this offseason, guaranteed, and you're going to look at their roster and you're going to go, how? They've been one of the best built rosters for realistically the last 7 years. You can make an argument that they're one of the best teams in the league based off of how their roster looks. Easily the last 5 years, for sure the last 3. And it's going to continue. It's insane. Pick a spot. I don't know. They just won the Super Bowl. Their roster's stacked. Pick a place. I don't know. Now moving on to Washington. Again, you played in the NFC Championship game. You got there for a reason. But they need some help on the defensive side. Their offense is looking pretty good. They need some help on defense. They've got some older, bigger name guys on defense. Bobby Wagner, phenomenal player, but not the same guy. He's not the same step that he used to be. His actual football IQ, though, massive addition, massive piece, and bringing in those young guys and being able to build this just a super young defense that also is going to be a big benefit for a couple years down the road when you have to pay, a certain somebody a really big contract, a certain someone is going to if they keep up the production that they're at, they're going to get a very large contract. So you're going to need to have a system built on the defensive side. And that's what most people don't talk about with the Chiefs is they're able to cycle in so much young talent on the defense, mostly because their coordinators don't change. But when you don't have to change anything on your defense and you need to cycle in young, athletic, top guys that you get out of the draft, hey, we're going to put you in. You get to hang out with a veteran guy. And that's exactly what Washington has the opportunity to build because their offense is kind of set. They don't really need to change too many pieces. I mean, it's going to be one here, one there. And going forward, they're pretty suited to be okay, which is why for Dallas, like, it's gonna be a struggle. If they don't build an incredible offensive line in both this offseason and next offseason, Eagles and Washington is going to just steamroll them. And then you move on to the laughingstock of the division, the New York Giants. I couldn't exactly pick. Their defensive line is okay. They've got a couple other pieces on defense that are okay. But I mean, you could make an argument. You could draft whatever position. I mean, hey, they need a quarterback. Hey, you need some, another couple offensive linemen. Your secondary is not great. You got rid of Saquon. You don't have a real number two, next to Neighbors. So, I mean, when you go through it, it's like, you need a lot. You're nowhere close. And that's the sad part for the Giants. And they're going to be pretty bad next year. And probably the year after that. Unless they just get some magical quarterback that comes in and they completely change the game. But I don't see it happening because it's not happening with any of the quarterbacks that are in this draft. I mean, there's no real lights out game changer in this draft. I mean, realistically, Cam Ward probably is the best prospect. I mean, we'll see based off of the combine. We'll see if anything changes. I mean, but we have all the game tape. Cam Ward is probably the best prospect. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Riley Leonard ends up being something. Like, I wouldn't like it. It's a situation where this is one of those drafts where it's like 3 of 4 of these guys might be in the league for 12 years because they're on a roster as a backup and you just never know about it. You're like, oh, Cam Ward's on our team as a backup. And it's just like, yeah, like I feel like this is kind of that draft class. So I don't think the Giants are going to be anything in the next 3-4 years. I mean, if they get a quarterback, so they're no, for the next 3 years, they wouldn't. Now, let's go on to the NFC South. In a division that's up for grabs, but it's interesting enough because the other teams that are fighting for it don't really have that much of an opportunity. So we're going to start with Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is in a very good position because they're not paying Baker a ton. They've got an okay structure. They've got a lot of veterans. Now, a lot of veterans is kind of an issue, as we saw last year. They ran into some injuries. But it's one of those where, hey, you kind of pick. Like, you can't say they're amazing at anything, and you can't say they're terrible at anything. Tampa Bay is truly the average team in the league. They are the true bare minimum, which is interesting because Baker has leveled himself up to now the top half of the league, but you still can't put Baker in the top of the top half. He falls in the bottom half of the top half, but you can make the playoffs with that guy. Now, are you going to win the Super Bowl with that guy? Probably not. And with this roster that they have, are you going to win the Super Bowl? Probably not. But can you make the playoffs and especially beat these other teams in the division? Most likely. And I think that's kind of where they're at again. I mean, they can kind of pick where they want. I mean, do they want a DN? Do they want another offensive lineman? Do they want to get some weapons to cover for their old guys that they have? Do they want to get, some more pieces in their secondary? Like, they kind of, accept all of those. But which ones you want to go first? I mean, I'm very big on the trenches. I'm huge on the trenches. I will always say, yep, take another O lineman, take another D lineman. I don't like, you can figure everything else out. If you can block for a long time, then you know what? Your quarterback can throw to pretty much whoever because wide receivers can't cover anybody for 5 seconds. If you have 4, 5, 6 seconds to throw because your linemen do a great job of blocking and you can extend the play, yeah, it doesn't matter who's running routes. And so Tampa Bay is just pick one. Like, yeah, I choose trenches. Now, New Orleans, this one kind of gets interesting because New Orleans is a bad team. And New Orleans is in cap hell. And the draft really won't help them that much. So it's tough. I mean, they've got Derek Carr, which he's the opposite of Baker. He's in the bottom half of the league. You can't say that Derek Carr is an awesome quarterback, especially now in 2025. It well past his prime. Hasn't really done anything since that one good season he had with the Raiders and he got hurt. He hasn't had anything special since then. They won 2 games to start last year and people thought they were legit. Yeah. That's about where they're at. That's the right standing. They're not that good. They don't have the pieces. Like, they're better than the Giants. Like, they're not that bad. Like, their roster is not that bad, but it's a lot closer to that than it is to being the top half of the league. They are a lot closer to the Giants than they are the Eagles. I mean, to use the actual standing. That is. And again, pick one. Now, the Falcons, it's slightly different because with the Falcons, you have a situation where I think Penix, I mean, we didn't really get much opportunity to see him, but what we did see looked pretty good. Now you've got an opportunity. Okay, well, they seem okay on offense. Like, they seem like they've always had these weapons, but then their defense, like, their D-line is, just their defense in general is, I don't know what Penix is. Like, at the end of the day, like, I don't know what Penix is. If Penix needs more weapons to assist him, then, hey, we need to bolster the weapons. If at the end of the day, like, your O-line is just that brutally bad, then it's just like, we need to build the O-line. But, like, you've got Bijan. Like, just give Bijan the ball, and then at the end of the day, actually involve Kyle Pitts. Like, this absolutely baffling how Kyle Pitts just does not get used. He doesn't get used. He's such a valuable piece that just doesn't get used, and so it's crazy. But the Falcons are in a good position. I think the place that they're at, because they have Penix, they can be patient. They've got some time. They don't have to pour everything right now. They don't have to do everything right this second. They can just take a breath and kind of get it done. Now, the last team in that division being the Panthers, we saw some good flashes from Bryce last year, especially just the way the team ended to end the season. They were playing some good ball. They looked like a lot more of a complete unit. They were actually, more organized. They looked like an actual football team. So the thing with the Panthers is it's the younger, slightly worse version of the Falcons. They're kind of in the same boat. Like, okay, we're starting to see some flashes from Bryce, but is he for sure really the guy? Long term? Like, hey, okay, we can let him play next year and then maybe the year after that, but like, are we really going to sign him to a long-term deal? Like, do we want Bryce? Like, that's the timing that the Panthers are in now, because it's like, okay, we've seen him now. This is year 3. Like, those questions start to come up, and so, yeah, I mean, again, like, they're a team where it's just like, I mean, their defense isn't great. I mean, we're starting to see their young weapons. I mean, Leggett is super country and talks funny and weird, and he's a pretty good receiver, but like, do they need another piece? Do they need a slightly better running back? Is it a committee thing? I mean, But is that slightly better than saying just like, well, I mean, at the end of the day, like we probably needed just another defensive lineman. We need another guy in the secondary. Like there are certain positions in football that are just they're way more valuable, and I'd rather have an amazing offensive and defensive line, and then the rest of the team, like you can kind of piece it together. If you have A's on your O line and D line, you can have C's everywhere else and be okay. It's crazy to think about. It's crazy to think about. But that is how a football team can change overnight. Now, are you going to win the Super Bowl with that team? No. But you could. And that's kind of what we saw. Like, it was Brock Purdy last year. Amazing O-line, D-line. And, I mean, it's not C's everywhere else because, I mean, that was an actual good team. But, like, you look at it now, it's like their O-line and D-line are better than people because we're moving on to the 49ers. Now they're just old. But their structure was fine. Why was their structure fine? Because they were amazing in the trenches. They had an amazing defense. And it's young offensive weapons. Well, now they have paid weapons in Ayuk because, I mean, he was a number one guy. What about Debo? What do you do with him? What do you do with Purdy? Like, now, the same kind of... McCaffrey missed a lot of games. Like, we're in an interesting boat with the 49ers. Is Trent Williams going to just retire one day? They're old. The 49ers are an old team. And I mean, yes, Ayuk got injured. Like, he'll be back. That's fine. But is he going to be the same guy? And you already paid him. So, like, did you mess up there? What if he comes back at 75% of what he was? Now we messed up. If you get rid of Debo, okay, is Pearsall really the guy? Is McCaffrey going to play all of the games next year? Is he going to play half the season next year? Is Brock Purdy the guy? Is this the guy we want to pay $60 million a year to? We haven't even gotten into their defense. Okay. Bosa. He's got a handful of more years. He's a great player. I mean, start to pick, a bunch of their guys on the defense. How much longer is Greenlaw going to play? And you can do that for most of their guys on the defense. They're studs. Big names. They've played a lot of ball. And they played a lot of deep playoff run ball. And you saw it last year. Last year was not an anomaly for the 49ers. Last year was, they went all out for 3 straight years and played a lot of extra football games. And they play a completely different brand of football than anyone else. They're physical. You saw the reason the Lions got beat up. They're physical. They play physical. They don't let anyone punk them. They're a physical team. Eagles, physical team. And you need a lot of young bodies to play that way. The Eagles are the young 49ers. That's all it is. The Eagles are the exact same as the 49ers, but they're 3-4 years younger. That's really what it is. Fresh, young bodies that play physical football, and they just beat up everybody. The 49ers beat up everybody. And naturally, over time, you beat up yourself. Now they need to fill those spots of those old names. All right. Seattle. Seattle's tough. Seattle's tough because they won 10 games last year. Seattle's a good team. Seattle's a good team because Geno is Baker, but just not as good. So you've got a pretty good roster, some young, up-and-coming weapons, some slightly older guys who we'll see how many more years they have. I'm kind of Bill Belichick method. I'm real quick to be like, you're gone. That's just the system. That's how it works. Like, hey, like especially when you can draft and like be quick to draft and fill those spots. Like I'm a firm believer in that. Like it's a system. It's a game. I've got now that like I've got a GM's perspective as someone who talks into a mic. Like you play Madden and you build the team a certain way. You see the teams that make it to the Super Bowl every single year and you go, these teams are built a certain way. And why do these certain teams always make it to the playoffs? Hey, why do the Patriots go on that run? Hey, why do the Chiefs go on their run? Hey, why do the Eagles always end up being, one of the main teams at the end of the year? Hey, why do the 49ers end up being the teams at the end of the year? And it's just like, they've got this sustained over time. Like, they've done that for the last, 10 years. Like, the Bears suck. Why? It's like, well, they don't build their team correctly. And so it's like someone like the Seahawks, like, man, they went 10-7 last year. Like, but they're, for the most part, semi-built okay. Like, they're just kind of average. Like, they're built okay, but like when you're talking about average, when you're one of those like teams that are in that middle bunch, like if you're not one of the best 4 teams in your conference, and you're not one of the worst 4 teams in the conference, and you're just caught in that middle chunk, like you're just one of those teams that's just like, oh my gosh, like this sucks. Like this absolutely sucks. Like you've got your top 8 teams and you've got your bottom 8 teams. And then the middle 16, that middle 16 just jockeys. Like, oh, I was at 10 and, we dropped all the way down to 14. Oh, we dropped to 20. Like that's how that works. And it just, the movement happens there. And then every once in a while, you'll get like 2 teams from the bottom jump up into the middle. Like every once in a while, like one of these teams come down and you get one of these, they're like, oh, we had a great year. And then it's like, oh, you end up right back down in the middle. It's like, why does that happen? Why? And it's like, well, you have some teams that are like, well, we're going to have a great offensive and defensive line. And then we're going to make sure we've got a really good quarterback. That's pretty much it. Like, we'll figure everything else out. I mean, that's literally how the Chiefs have played, which is crazy. But Seattle, yeah, they're just average. Like, they're just average, which is why, like, for the Rams played the Eagles the best out of anybody in the playoffs last year. Who should the Rams pick? We know who the Rams should pick. Remember how I said Riley Leonard earlier? I think that's a sneaky thing that's going to happen. I think people keep talking about, oh, Matthew Stafford's going to get traded. Oh, Matthew Stafford's going to... No, he's not. He's not going anywhere. Matthew Stafford is the first, second, or third best quarterback in the NFC. Make the argument. You want to say Jalen Hurts because he just won the Super Bowl? Sure. You want to say Jordan Love? Sure. Who's next? Who's next? You better. It's that boy Matty. Because it's not Jared Goff. Jared Goff made it to the Super Bowl and lost. Stafford took the same team to the Super Bowl and won. Stafford had the Eagles on the ropes. Like, they're very good. But they should draft their replacement. Just as hey, draft a replacement. And I think Riley Leonard would be a decent pick. But the Patriots used to do it all the time. You just draft a quarterback. I think Matthew Stafford will probably... I think you've got 2 years with Matthew Stafford. So if you've got 26 and 27, if you draft a guy, get a couple of linemen, Cooper Kupp's going to be gone, so realistically get some weapons. But if there's a quarterback like round 5, there's a chance you might be able to snag a guy. I don't know who it is. I need to really go do a deep dive, but it's just like, pose it out there. It's a thought. All right, we're going to finish it up with the Cardinals as... What are they doing with Kyler? What are they doing with Kyler? Kyler... I don't know. Defense, another guy to pair with Harrison. Some O-line. But, I mean, really, what are you doing with Kyler? I think the Cardinals might move him. I think that could be a thing that happens here soon. Is the Cardinals, they might move him. But who they get, I think they go defense. I mean, when your head coach is a defensive guy, I think they just naturally tend to go that way. The fact that, hey, we've got a number one now. If Kyler's really your guy, then it's just like, okay, what else do we really need? Like, I think it naturally the coach is going to want defensive guys, so I think they just go defensive. And that's kind of where we're at. So the way too early for a prediction. That's the early prediction for today. Bears go 9-8 in 2026. So if you like this video, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that way you don't miss when I do the AFC teams, and I will see you over there in that one.